I've been married to my husband, Eric, for 5 years now. I'm 30, he's 33, and our relationship is strong, except for one massive problem: his mother, Linda. From the moment I met her, she decided I wasn't good enough for her son, and she made sure I knew it. Linda is 58, upper middle class, and the type of woman who believes her opinions are law. She grew up privileged, married into more money, and sees herself as some kind of matriarch of a perfect, sophisticated family. And me? I come from a working class background. My parents worked hard to give me a decent life, but we never had luxury. According to Linda, that makes me a gold digger. She has never outright said it, but she doesn't have to. Every conversation, every snide remark, every public humiliation, it's all a reminder that she sees me as beneath them. I should have seen the signs earlier. The first time I met her, she barely looked at me, just smiled, sipped her wine, and asked Eric, "So what does she do again?" Like I wasn't sitting right there. When he told her about my job, she gave that fake pleasant nod and said, "Oh, how? Interesting." Then came the wedding. I should have known she'd pull something, but I didn't expect her to do it in front of 200 guests. During the speeches, she took the mic, smiled at Eric, and said, "I always thought he'd end up with someone ambitious, someone who would challenge him. But love works in mysterious ways, doesn't it?" The room went dead silent. People exchanged awkward glances. Meanwhile, I had to smile and pretend my mother-in-law hadn't just implied her son married beneath him. After that, she got bolder. At family gatherings, she'd point out any minor weight gain with an innocent, "Are you expecting?" followed by a dramatic, "Oh, just teasing. You take things so seriously." When Eric and I struggled with infertility, she made snide comments about how some women just aren't meant to be mothers. She'd bring up my past financial struggles at the dinner table like it was casual conversation, saying things like, "It must be so nice to have financial security now, huh?" And Eric? He'd call her out, but only in private. He'd tell her to stop, tell her it wasn't okay, but he never truly shut her down in front of people. He thought she'd come around eventually. She didn't. The final straw happened 2 weeks ago at a family dinner. Everything was going fine until Linda, in her usual smug tone, announced to the entire table, Eric used to date women with real ambition before he settled down. I put my fork down, looked her straight in the eye, and said, "Linda, that was incredibly out of line." The table went silent. Linda blinked, then gave me that fake laugh. "Oh, you're so sensitive." This time I didn't let it slide. I calmly said, "No, I'm just tired of pretending your comments are okay." She wasn't expecting that. She looked around like she expected someone to back her up, but no one did. That night I told Eric I was done. Either he put his foot down, or I would. And I meant it. The next day, I vented to my best friend about everything, and she said, "Why not turn the tables?" At first, I dismissed the idea. I didn't want to stoop to her level. But later that night, I reflected on how much I had endured, how every attempt to keep the peace had only empowered Linda. I wasn't looking for revenge, but I needed to make it clear that I wouldn't be her target anymore. Slowly, I began forming a plan, not to humiliate her, but to expose the truth in a way that would hold her accountable. Meanwhile, Linda faced zero consequences for treating me like garbage. That's when it clicked. She wasn't going to stop until she was forced to, and I was done letting her walk all over me. Eric promised to set boundaries, but I wasn't convinced. I knew if I wanted real change, I had to handle it myself. In 2 weeks, Linda was hosting a massive family reunion. Everyone would be there, and if she tried anything again, this time I'd be ready. Linda had no idea what was coming. The family reunion was set to take place at Linda's house. A big event, packed with relatives from all over. The kind of gathering where she loved to hold court and remind everyone why she was the most important person in the room. This time, though, things were going to be different. The 2 weeks leading up to the event, I prepared. I wasn't just going to sit there and take her abuse anymore. I was going to make sure that every single thing she did made her look like the problem, without me coming across as petty. I started by going through old messages, years worth of passive-aggressive texts, snide comments, and voice memos where she joked about how I wasn't good enough for Eric. And it wasn't just texts, I had clips too. My best friend had recorded parts of my wedding, and sure enough, she had captured Linda's little speech about how Eric had settled. Eric was still hesitant. He kept saying he'd talk to her like that would fix anything. It never had before, and it wasn't going to now. Then, I reached out to Melanie, Eric's sister. If there was one person in the family who hated Linda's behavior as much as I did, it was her. She was blunt about it, too, told me she'd spent years dealing with their mother's controlling behavior. And honestly, she was surprised I hadn't snapped earlier. With Melanie on my side, I walked into the reunion ready. The moment we stepped through the door, Linda locked eyes on me like a hawk spotting prey. It didn't take long. As I set down my purse, she looked at me with that smirk and announced to the room, "Oh, did you finally learn how to cook? Or is Eric still ordering takeout every night?" There it was. The opening she gave me. I let out a small laugh. Not an angry one, not defensive, just amused. Then, with the most casual tone I could muster, I said, "Oh, Linda, you always have such creative ways of trying to insult me. It's honestly impressive." Silence. A few relatives shifted uncomfortably, unsure if they were supposed to laugh. Linda blinked a few times like she hadn't expected me to respond at all. She tried to backtrack with a fake chuckle, but the moment had already passed. Throughout the evening, every time she made a passive-aggressive remark, I responded in the same calm, even tone. Nothing angry, nothing emotional, just statements that made her look petty. When she tried to bring up my job in a condescending way, I tilted my head and smiled. "That's funny. Eric was just telling me the other day how proud he is of my career. But I guess some people just enjoy tearing others down." That one made Eric snap to attention. He had heard the comments for years but never really processed how they sounded in front of a crowd. This time, he actually backed me up. "Yeah, Mom, I don't get why you always say things like that." Linda faltered. "It was just a joke." "I don't think it is," Eric responded. The power was shifting. For the first time, The weight of the conversation wasn't falling on me, it was falling on her. And then I dropped the real bombshell. Linda had always loved bringing up my family's financial background, acting like I should be grateful to be part of her world. She did it again, that night, an offhand comment about how not everyone grows up with financial security. I just smiled and said, "Oh, that's actually a great point." Speaking of financial security, I wonder if everyone knows that Eric and I paid off that debt of yours last year? The entire room went silent. Linda's face turned bright red. That's not, Eric sighed. It's true. Gasps. A few people glanced at each other. Even some of the relatives who normally stayed out of things looked at her differently now. She tried to laugh it off. It wasn't. Melanie, who had been holding back all night, finally cut in. "Come on, Mom. You love talking about how much better you are than everyone. And here you were, needing their money." That was it. Linda stormed off, mumbling something about how we had ruined the night. But the damage was done. The whispers started immediately. I could hear relatives talking amongst themselves, some even sending me looks of sympathy. The ones who had been neutral before, they weren't anymore. And as I stood there, watching Linda disappear into another room, I realized something. For the first time ever, she was the one embarrassed. Round one? Mine. The fallout from the reunion was immediate. By the time Eric and I got home that night, my phone was already buzzing with messages from family members. Some were supportive, cousins and distant aunts who had always kept quiet messaged me privately, saying they never realized just how cruel Linda was until they saw it unfold in real time. A few admitted they had always suspected something was off but never wanted to get involved. Others were less friendly. A few of Linda's flying monkeys, older relatives who had been in her pocket for years, sent passive-aggressive messages about how I shouldn't have embarrassed her like that. One even had the audacity to tell me I should apologize for causing a scene. Eric sat next to me, reading over my shoulder, quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time in 5 years, he actually admitted it. He had let this go on for too long. He said he should have done more to defend me in the past, and that seeing it play out in public made him realize just how bad it was. I didn't respond. There wasn't much to say. He could apologize all he wanted, but now it was time for action. Linda, of course, went into full damage control mode. She spent the next few days calling family members, crying about how she had been humiliated in her own home. She spun a dramatic tale of how I had blindsided her, how I had come to the reunion with an agenda and turned her own son against her. She didn't just play the victim. She went on a full-blown smear campaign. Within a week, I started hearing whispers that I had bullied her, that I was trying to alienate her from the family, that I was destroying their dynamic. That's when I decided to make my next move. I started gathering receipts. I went back through years of messages, texts, emails, voicemails, every passive-aggressive insult, every fake joke that had a sharp blade hidden underneath. And then, I did something I knew would make a statement. I sent a group message to the family. Nothing dramatic, no long-winded explanation. Just screenshots. Linda's words, in her own texts, laid out for everyone to see. The so-called innocent comments about me being a gold digger. The time she joked about how I'd never really be part of the family. The texts mocking my inability to conceive. The voice memo where she laughed about how Eric had downgraded. Then at the bottom I wrote, "I just want to make sure everyone knows the full story before making their own conclusions." And I hit send. The reaction was immediate. Some family members who had been on the fence suddenly went quiet. A few even reached out to say they were disgusted by Linda's words. One uncle, who had always defended Linda, messaged me personally. "I had no idea she said those things. That's not okay." Melanie, bless her, took things a step further. She confronted Linda directly. I don't know exactly how that conversation went, but I do know that within an hour, Linda was calling Eric. When he picked up, she was crying. Not an apology, not even close. She accused me of trying to ruin her reputation, of turning the family against her. She said I had manipulated Eric into choosing me over his own mother. For the first time in our marriage, Eric didn't just brush it off. He told her, flat out, that her behavior was unacceptable, that she had been mistreating me for years, and I had every right to stand up for myself. That she wasn't the victim in this situation, she was the cause of it. She refused to listen. Instead, she doubled down, calling me too sensitive and saying I had blown everything out of proportion. So I made my final move. I told Eric I was going low contact. From now on, if Linda insulted me, I wasn't going to argue, I was going to leave. If she tried to bait me into a fight, I wasn't going to engage. If she wanted to see us, it would be on our terms, not hers. Eric agreed. And that's when I knew something had changed. Because Linda thrives on control. She needs to be the center of attention, the one dictating how things go. And for the first time, she was losing that power. Within days, she started backpedaling. The love bombing began, texts about how she missed us, how family is the most important thing, how she didn't want there to be bad blood. I ignored them. She tried sending gifts, an expensive bottle of wine for Eric, a silk scarf for me. I ignored them. She tried getting other family members to guilt trip us. Linda is so heartbroken over this. Don't you think it's time to move past everything? Ignored. The silence from me must have driven her insane. Because the next thing I knew, Melanie was texting me, "Mom is flipping out. She says she won't be ignored." Oh, I knew. Because for the first time in years, Linda wasn't the one pulling the strings. She was the one being humiliated. And if she didn't change, things were only going to get worse for her. Going low contact with Linda was supposed to give us peace. Instead, it pushed her into full-blown panic mode. The first few days, the love bombing started. Long, emotional texts filled with dramatic statements about how she never meant to hurt anyone and how everything was just a misunderstanding. She insisted that I had taken things too seriously and that she was only ever joking. Eric barely glanced at his phone. He didn't respond, just kept scrolling past the messages as if they weren't there. But I could tell this was uncharted territory for him. For years, he had always tried to keep the peace, always brushed off her behavior because it was easier than confronting it. Now, for the first time, he was ignoring her outright. When the texts didn't work, she escalated. The calls started, one after another, all day long. She left voicemails that swung between sweet and desperate. One minute, she was tearfully saying she just wanted to talk, and the next, she was ranting about how I was manipulating her son. Eric let the calls go unanswered. But after 3 days, she started calling from different numbers. She even left a voicemail on our home phone, one we barely used anymore, sobbing about how I had turned Eric against his own mother. That's when the extended family started getting involved. Some relatives, mostly the ones who had seen how Linda treated me firsthand, stayed out of it or reached out in support. Melanie, as expected, was on my side. She sent me screenshots of the messages Linda had been blasting in the family group chat, complaining that Eric and I were punishing her. But others weren't so quiet. A few of the older relatives, ones who had known Linda her whole life, started pushing back. Messages rolled in, urging Eric to be the bigger person. One aunt even had the audacity to suggest that I should apologize just to smooth things over. Eric still didn't respond, and that's when Linda lost it completely. Late one night, Eric's phone buzzed with a long, angry text from her, a full-on rant. She accused me of being a manipulative gold digger who had brainwashed her son. She claimed I had poisoned their relationship and that I was nothing but an opportunist who had latched onto Eric for his money. Eric sat on the couch, staring at his phone, reading the message over and over. He didn't say a word at first, just let out a slow breath, locked his screen, and passed me the phone. I read through it quickly. The words were venomous, dripping with bitterness, and for the first time they weren't sugar-coated. Eric sat back, his face conflicted. I knew she was bad, but seeing it all laid out like this, he muttered. I should have stepped in sooner. His hesitation lingered, but as I showed him more messages, his expression hardened. I can't let this continue. He let out a slow breath, then said, I think it's time we make some real changes. Instead of just brushing it off, we planned our next steps together. Then I typed one simple sentence underneath. Thank you for finally saying how you really feel, Linda. Now we don't have to pretend anymore. And I hit send. The reaction was instant. Some family members immediately went silent. Others, ones who had been sitting on the fence, started privately messaging me, horrified by what she had said. Linda, realizing she had made a colossal mistake, went into damage control. She sent a follow-up message, claiming she was just emotional and that she didn't mean it. No one was buying it. A cousin sent a message in the chat, calling her out for her behavior. An uncle chimed in, saying that if this was how she talked about me in text, he could only imagine what she had said behind my back. Melanie, never one to hold back, openly asked, so if Op is a gold digger, why did she and Eric pay off your debt last year? Silence. Linda didn't respond. I thought that might be the end of it, that maybe, just maybe, she'd realize she had lost and let it go. But I had underestimated just how far she was willing to go. The next morning, Eric's phone lit up with another message from her. Short, blunt, final. If you don't leave Op, you're no longer my son. Eric didn't even hesitate. He stared at the screen for a second, then, without an ounce of emotion, replied, then I guess you don't have a son anymore. And just like that, the bridge burned. Linda had been playing a game, expecting Eric to fold under pressure. She thought he'd beg, that he'd come running back, desperate to fix things. But he didn't. He put his phone down, looked at me, and said, she finally crossed the line. I'm done. No anger, no second guessing. Just pure, simple exhaustion. Linda must have realized, too late, that she had pushed too far. Within minutes, another message came through, softer this time. She claimed she didn't mean it, that she was just scared of losing him. Eric didn't even read the whole thing. He blocked her number. And just like that, she was cut off. Linda had always loved being the center of attention, but this wasn't the kind of attention she wanted. Word spread fast through the family. Within days, almost everyone knew about the message she had sent to Eric, demanding he leave me or lose her as a mother. The moment Eric responded with, then I guess you don't have a son anymore, and blocked her, the gossip started. Relatives were calling each other, exchanging shocked reactions, and trying to figure out how things had escalated so quickly. A few family members, mostly the ones who had stayed neutral before, started reaching out to me directly. Some admitted they had ignored Linda's behavior for years and regretted it. Others said they had always known she was controlling but never thought she would go that far. Melanie was the first to call, and she could barely get a sentence out between laughing. She told me I had done what everyone else had been too scared to do, finally put Linda in her place. She had dealt with her mother's controlling nature for years but had never seen anyone shut her down like that before. But Linda wasn't going to go down quietly. When ignoring us didn't work, she switched tactics. She started reaching out to relatives, spinning a whole new story about how I was isolating Eric from his family. She painted herself as the poor, abandoned mother whose evil daughter-in-law had manipulated her son into cutting her off. A few of her usual enablers jumped on board, sending me passive-aggressive messages about how family is everything and you shouldn't come between a mother and her son. That's when Eric stepped in. He sent a mass message to the family. Simple, direct, no room for misinterpretation. I want to make something very clear. I made the decision to go no contact with my mother. Op didn't force me. I did this because I've had enough of the way she treats my wife and me. If anyone has a problem with that, you can consider yourself blocked too. That shut most people up. Linda, realizing she was losing sympathy, went full dramatic mode. She took to Facebook. A long, emotional post about how a mother's love is unconditional, even when her child is manipulated against her. How she had been abandoned by her own flesh and blood. How she only ever wanted what was best for her son, but outside influences had poisoned him against her. She expected sympathy. At first, some of her friends jumped to her defense, sending love messages, while others hesitated, unsure of the full story. But as more people came forward, Melanie, other relatives, even acquaintances who had seen her behavior firsthand, the tide began to turn. Over the next few days, some of her closest allies stopped responding to her messages. She was losing ground, slowly but surely. Maybe you should respect your son's choices. This sounds like a you problem. Why is your first instinct to post this on Facebook instead of fixing things privately? If you're being cut off, there's usually a reason. The post was up for 2 days before she deleted it. Eric's father, who had mostly stayed silent throughout this entire mess, reached out to me directly. The conversation was short, but he told me I never stood up to Linda either. But I respect what you're doing. Linda wasn't just losing Eric, she was losing her grip on the family. With every passing day, she got more desperate. She started sending messages about family emergencies. Suddenly, she was sick, weak, and needed Eric. It was nothing serious, just vague statements designed to guilt-trip him into reaching out. He didn't fall for it. Then, one of Linda's own friends reached out to me. Someone I had met maybe once or twice but had never really spoken to. She admitted Linda had a long history of toxic behavior, and that I wasn't the first person she had bullied. Apparently, she had done this before with other women Eric had dated. Some lasted longer than others, but in the end, they had all left. I was just the first one who fought back. That's when it became clear. Linda had always assumed she could get away with this. She had always expected Eric to choose her, to fold under pressure. She had never once considered the possibility that she could actually lose. And now, her social circle was shrinking. More and more people were distancing themselves from her. Eric and I felt a weight lift off our shoulders. We didn't have to walk on eggshells anymore. No more worrying about what she would say. No more tense holidays, no more drama. To celebrate, we booked a weekend getaway. Just a small trip, nothing extravagant. But it was the first time in years that we truly felt free from her influence. While we were away, a package arrived at our house. It's from Linda. Inside was a handwritten letter, neatly folded, along with a small box of expensive chocolates. The letter was long. Too long. I didn't read it. I tossed it straight into the trash. Months passed. For the first time since I had married Eric, life felt peaceful. No snide comments. No backhanded insults disguised as jokes. No family gatherings filled with tense silence and forced smiles. Linda had been completely cut off, and the weight of her toxicity was finally gone. Eric and I thrived. We went on more trips, spent quality time together, and actually enjoyed our holidays. Melanie kept in touch, occasionally updating us on the family's reaction. Some relatives had distanced themselves from Linda after the drama. Others still clung to the idea that we should forgive and move on. Linda, however, had gone quiet. No texts, no phone calls, no attempts to force her way back in. It was too quiet. I knew she wasn't the type to give up easily. She was waiting, lurking in the background, looking for the perfect moment to force her way back in. And that moment arrived the day Eric and I announced we were expecting a baby. We shared the news on social media, a simple post with an ultrasound picture and a caption about how excited we were to start this new chapter. Within an hour, Linda was blowing up our phones. First, it was the calls. Over and over, her name flashed across Eric's screen. He didn't answer. The calls didn't stop. She switched numbers. Then the text started, long paragraphs, one after another. She was suddenly overjoyed for us. She had so many ideas for the nursery. She couldn't wait to meet her grandchild. Eric ignored every message. That night, an email came through, one of those long-winded, dramatic ones. She demanded to be part of the baby's life. She deserved to be involved. She would not be left out. Eric sent one response: "You are not part of our lives anymore. Stop contacting us." That should have been the end of it. But Linda refused to accept it. She reached out to family members, spinning her usual web of lies. She sobbed to them about how I was stealing her grandchild from her. She played the heartbroken mother act, telling anyone who would listen that I had brainwashed Eric. Some relatives tried to intervene. A cousin sent a message about how families should stick together. An aunt called to ask if we could at least let Linda be a part of the baby's life. I shut it down quickly. I wouldn't let a stranger treat me like that, so why would I allow it from family? That answer seemed to make its way through the grapevine. The messages slowed. The relatives pushing Linda's agenda backed off. But Linda? She escalated. Days later, Eric got a call from his workplace. Security reported that someone had been lurking near the entrance, repeatedly asking to speak with him. When they approached her, she claimed she was just checking in on her son. But when security insisted she leave, she became agitated, insisting I had brainwashed him. Though not a full-blown public spectacle, it was unsettling enough for Eric to consider taking further legal steps. She had actually shown up at Eric's job. She screamed about how I had ruined her life, how Eric had been brainwashed. She begged to see him. When security refused to let her inside, she threw a full tantrum, yelling loud enough for people in the building to hear. Security escorted her out. Eric blocked her last known number. Then he changed his work number entirely. At this point, Linda had no real way to reach us. No direct line to manipulate or guilt trip. So she did what she always did. She went public. A long Facebook post appeared on her profile. It wasn't an apology, it was a performance. She talked about how much she had suffered, how she had tried to be a loving mother, only to be cast aside, how her own child had abandoned her for a woman who had turned him against his own family. She expected sympathy. She got dragged. The comments were brutal. Maybe you should respect your son's choices. This sounds like a you problem. Are you seriously making this about yourself? You're blocked. Within hours, she deleted the post. And then finally, she disappeared. No more calls. No more emails. No more tantrums or guilt trips. Whether it was exhaustion, humiliation, or pure realization that she had lost, she went completely silent. And just like that, the war was over. Eric and I finally had what we wanted: peace. Linda got exactly what she deserved. And we could now raise our child in a world where her toxicity had no place. Life without Linda had been peaceful. Eric and I were busy preparing for the baby's arrival, setting up the nursery, attending doctor's appointments, and actually enjoying this stage of life without drama. No sudden phone calls, no guilt-tripping messages, no social media meltdowns. For months, Linda had been completely silent. It was suspicious. She wasn't the type to accept defeat. If anything, she was the kind of person who waited, lingering in the background until she found the perfect moment to strike. And then out of nowhere, Eric's workplace was flooded with emails. At first, they seemed like spam, random, anonymous messages sent to his company email. But then the content became clear. Each email warned Eric that he was being manipulated, that his wife was dangerous, that he needed to wake up before it was too late. Eric read through them once and immediately recognized the writing style. Linda. She wasn't just trying to contact him. She was trying to destroy his reputation at work. She used different email addresses each time, but the pattern was obvious. Some messages were written like a concerned outsider trying to warn him. Others were filled with outright accusations, implying that I was controlling him, cutting him off from family, and forcing him into a miserable life. Eric saved every single email. We consulted a lawyer. Since Linda had already shown up at Eric's workplace and sent harassing emails, he advised us to document everything. We filed an official police report to establish a record of harassment. A few weeks later, we received notice that our request for a restraining order was granted, legally barring her from contacting us or coming near Eric's workplace. Before we could take action, Linda made her most unhinged move yet. She crashed my baby shower. The event was being held at a nice venue, a beautiful afternoon surrounded by friends, family, and people who actually cared about me. Everything was perfect. Laughter, gifts, games, and no tension in sight, until Linda burst through the doors. Everything stopped. She wasn't just walking in like a normal person, she was performing. Tears streaming down her face, hands trembling dramatically. A loud gasp as she fell to her knees in the middle of the room, sobbing that I was ripping her grandchild away from her. The room went dead silent. A few guests who had only heard about Linda's behavior sat frozen in shock. Others, like Melanie, rolled their eyes, already expecting something like this. Linda wailed, loud, dramatic, attention-grabbing. She clutched her chest, looking around at the guests like she was searching for support. I stood up, calm as ever. You weren't invited, Linda. Leave. She didn't move. You can't do this to me. She cried out. I'm the grandmother. Security was already on their way. I had planned for this. I had expected that if she was ever going to try something, it would be here, at an event where she could maximize her audience. As the security guards entered, Linda scrambled to her feet, desperate now. She spun toward the guests, voice rising as she pointed at me. She's poisoned my son against me. She's destroying our family. She won't even let me see my grandchild. I didn't react. I didn't get emotional. I simply said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, Linda, maybe you should tell everyone about the emails you've been sending to Eric's workplace. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Linda froze. For the first time, she had no words. The guests started murmuring. A few turned to Eric, waiting for confirmation. He nodded, pulling out his phone and holding up the email screenshots. There was no way to deny it. The moment was over. Security grabbed Linda's arms, firmly leading her toward the exit as she kicked and screamed the whole way. This isn't over. She shrieked. You'll regret this. You'll all regret this. The door slammed shut. She was gone. The guests sat there, stunned. Then, one by one, they started talking. A few people approached me, admitting they had always thought I was exaggerating about Linda's behavior, until they saw it firsthand. Others apologized for ever doubting me. Even relatives who had been neutral before were shaken by what they had just witnessed. Melanie shook her head. She just humiliated herself in front of everyone. And she was right. Linda had spent years trying to make me look bad, but in the end, she had exposed herself. After the baby shower disaster, Linda disappeared. No calls, no texts, no more dramatic Facebook rants, just complete radio silence. At first, it seemed suspicious. She had never backed down before, but as weeks passed with no signs of her, it started to feel real. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally given up. Then, 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from a lawyer. Linda was suing for grandparent rights. Eric and I sat at the kitchen table, reading the letter in disbelief. She was actually trying to force her way back into our child's life through the court system. We didn't even need to discuss what to do next. Eric picked up his phone, called our lawyer, and within the hour we had a meeting scheduled. Here's the thing about grandparent rights. They vary by state, and in some cases grandparents can win if they prove they have a strong, pre-existing relationship with the child. Linda? She had nothing. She had never met our baby. She had never been involved in my pregnancy. She had actively harassed us for months. There was no case here, just a desperate, last-ditch attempt to regain control. Our lawyer wasn't worried. He assured us that this was just a scare tactic and that Linda had no legal standing. But we still had to go through the process, filing our response and waiting for the court's decision. In the meantime, Linda went back to her favorite strategy, playing the victim online. A long, dramatic Facebook post appeared, filled with fake sorrow and revisionist history. She claimed she had been cut off from her grandchild for no reason, that she was a loving mother who had done nothing but try to keep her family together. She painted me as the villain, an evil daughter-in-law who had stolen her son and brainwashed him against her. But this time, it completely backfired. People weren't buying it anymore. The comment section turned into a public takedown. Weren't you just escorted out of their baby shower by security? Didn't you try to get your son fired? Maybe you should respect their boundaries instead of suing them. Eric's father had spent years tolerating Linda's antics, always preferring to stay in the background rather than confront her. But after the baby shower incident and the lawsuit, he had finally reached his limit. When I spoke with him privately, he admitted he had been enabling her behavior for years. I thought it was just her way of showing she cared, he confessed. But I see now, I should have stepped in long ago. When she tried to spin another dramatic lie on Facebook, he finally broke his silence. Linda, stop lying. You did this to yourself. And from then on, he distanced himself completely. That was it. Linda deleted the post within minutes. But by then, the screenshots had already spread. Her credibility was shattered. And then, a week later, the court's decision arrived. Case dismissed. Our lawyer assured us that Linda had no legal standing, but we still had to go through the motions. A preliminary hearing was scheduled, and we provided all the necessary documentation, proof of harassment, past restraining orders, and her lack of relationship with our child. The judge took one look at the case, reviewed the evidence, and ultimately dismissed it, stating that there was no grounds for further litigation. Eric and I sat in the lawyer's office, going through the paperwork, and for the first time in years, it felt final. Linda had no power, no control, nothing left. A few days later, one last message came through from a blocked number. "I hope you're happy. You destroyed this family. I didn't even bother responding. I just blocked the number." Eric did the same. He looked at me and said, "That's the last time she'll ever get to contact us." And just like that, she was gone. No calls, no emails, no sudden unwanted appearances, just silence. For the first time in years, I felt at peace. After everything, the public humiliations, the manipulation, the toxic games, Linda had finally lost. She was out of our lives for good. A full year has passed. A year without Linda. A year without drama, manipulation, or backhanded insults. A year of peace. And in that year, so much has changed. I gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. She is the light of our lives, and our home is filled with love and laughter. Eric and I have never been happier, raising our daughter in an environment free of toxicity. There are no forced family gatherings, no snide remarks disguised as jokes, no walking on eggshells, just peace. Linda has remained completely absent. She has never met our daughter, never sent a gift, never even tried to reach out, not directly at least. But despite her silence toward us, Melanie still hears things. And from what she tells us, Linda's life has completely fallen apart. After we cut her off, her entire support system started crumbling. Over time, more and more people distanced themselves from her. Family members who once defended her finally saw her for who she was. And friends who had been in her corner started avoiding her, tired of the endless drama and victim playing. She lost her influence. She lost her influence. She lost her reputation. And then she started losing everything else. Her health began declining. She had always relied on Eric to take care of her in old age, assuming that, no matter what, he would always be there. Without him, she had no one to turn to. She tried reaching out to distant relatives for sympathy, playing the role of the abandoned mother and grandmother. It didn't work. Everyone knew the story by now. They knew how she had treated me, how she had tried to sue us, how she had publicly humiliated herself at my baby shower. No one wanted to deal with her. And then came the final blow. Eric's father left her. After years of enabling her behavior, he finally realized the truth: she was toxic, and she wasn't going to change. He filed for divorce and moved on with his life, free from the suffocating weight of her drama. Linda was completely alone. With no financial support, she struggled to keep up with her lifestyle. She had always taken money for granted, assuming there would always be someone, Eric, her husband, the family, to help her if things ever got difficult. But there was no one left. Over the years, Linda had lived beyond her means, assuming there would always be someone to bail her out, Eric, her husband, or even distant relatives. But after we cut her off, her financial mismanagement caught up with her. She had overextended herself with loans and luxury expenses, and with no steady income of her own, her savings dwindled. She had to sell her house and downsize into a small apartment, bitter and alone, with no one left to manipulate. And despite everything, she still refused to take accountability. To her, she was the victim. We were the villains. And then, one day, a letter arrived in the mail. It was from Linda. She was begging for a second chance. She wrote about how much she missed her family, how she regretted the past, how she just wanted to meet her granddaughter. She didn't apologize. She didn't acknowledge what she had done. She just wanted back in. I didn't even consider it. I had spent years enduring her cruelty. I had been humiliated, insulted, and disrespected at every turn. I had given her chance after chance, only for her to double down on her behavior every single time. She had made her choice. She had destroyed every relationship she had. And now she had to live with the consequences. I tossed the letter straight into the trash. Eric didn't even read it. "I don't care what happens to her anymore," he said. And that was that. I wasn't even angry. I didn't feel bitterness or rage, just relief. Linda had lost everything. And me, I had built a life filled with love, joy, and peace. As I watched my daughter play, I thought about everything we had been through. All the pain, the manipulation, the years of disrespect. And now, it was over. Linda would never be a part of this family again. And the best part? She did it to herself.